Welcome to freedomlovin.com, where we focus on building freedom in an unfree world. Through personal development, location independence, and passive income strategies. Now here's your host, Kevin Koskela.
Welcome to Freedom Lovin'. This is episode number 53, and once again, this is Kevin. Thanks for listening, and today I'm going to have a little bit different type of show. I decided to curate a few podcasts. I want to see how this goes. I listen to a ton of podcasts every week, and just on my walks, and just if I ever get in the car, I always have a podcast going. And typically they are something to do with what I talk about in this show, like the freedom stuff, philosophy, financial freedom, business, like all of those topics are what I'm constantly listening to, and even some of the self-improvement shows that I've been picking up. So I thought it would be good to share some of what I listen to, although I think I'll just limit it to 2 or 3 different clips each time I do this. But I'm going to start with this one. Would really love some feedback. Today I have 3 shows, and I'm just going to pick out clips, like 2 3-minute clips on each of these. One is Nomad Capitalist, and that's Andrew Henderson, and I've had him on the show. He's had me on his show, and I really like his show. It's a great topic. It's how to protect yourself, protect your assets, diversify, get out there, make investments in other parts of the world, and really see what's out there outside of like the U.S. and the Western world. So that's the first one, and then Tropical MBA is the second one. It's Dan and Ian over there, also friends of mine, and they have a podcast, a recent one called How to Make Your First $1,000 Online, which is really right in line with what I've been talking about lately. So there's that one. And then lastly, but not least, is Wes Bertrand's Complete Liberty. He did his actually second to last show. He's talking about self-esteem, and he had some really great things to say, and I'll have that coming up in just a minute. So let's see, the last week or so, I've been just moving and setting things up, and really came into view that this lifestyle of moving constantly is not good for productivity. So I really took a lot more time this time to find an apartment. And then once I got the apartment, it was actually a lot easier. But I did have some setup things to do. I mean, it's a furnished place, and I actually really like it too, by the way. I think this is probably the nicest apartment I've ever lived in. We'll see what happens, but so far so good. It's furnished, it's got really nice furniture, it's got those concrete floors, it just looks super nice, and I like what they did with it. I like the layout and everything, so hopefully it works out. I'm here I signed an 8.5 month lease, doesn't mean I'm here for the entire time, but I think I'll feel a little bit more settled and more able to be productive for a longer period of time. So, but the bouncing around I don't think is very good, but at the same time, I think you can do it. You just have to have things set up ahead of time. I don't think I did a great job of really planning this one out, because I got here to San Diego, got a temporary spot for a week, and started looking for an apartment. I thought I would find something within a day or two, and it turned into like almost every day I was just spending most of my days looking at places and trying to find the right spot and the right deal. And for me, I'm really picky about landlords and who I'm renting from, because that could make or break the experience. And that also, because I've talked about on the show before, I like to Airbnb the place out, and if I get the feeling that they are not going to be going for that, I don't want to rent from them. So all that considered, it took me a long time, and I got in here though a couple days ago, and I'm almost all unpacked, probably about 75% of the way there. The biggest challenge has been dealing with this cable, getting internet. That's all I need here is internet. I mean, everything else is secondary. And the internet thing has just been a real problem. The problem here, and I think most places in the U.S. and most places in the world probably, when you need internet, you have very limited choices on what companies to go to. So here in downtown, I think it's really just Cox Cable. I don't know if there's even another option. I have T-Mobile, so I can use the hotspot. But I wanted to get an actual modem and everything because if I have other people staying here, I think it's easier. And although I do have a little hotspot device, I just have to unpack and find that. So I may switch at some point I may switch to T-Mobile because it's actually a cheaper deal. It's a better deal. You can get faster, more gigabytes for less money. So, but anyway, I called Cox, and the first thing was it was really easy, but then the problem started. They wanted to charge me $30 to set up the cable, and that wasn't them setting up, that was me setting it up. And I just questioned the guy. I didn't even ask him. I said, really? You're going to charge me $30 to set up the cable myself? And he immediately said, yeah, that doesn't make sense. And so this customer service guy was really nice, and he got his supervisor, he asked him, and he gave me a credit for $30. So I got that waived, basically. So that was good. But then he said, okay, it'll be there Wednesday. It'll be available Wednesday. I was moving in Tuesday. Now, I don't really understand why they can't just flip a switch to turn on the internet. That this is 2014. I think it's pretty easy to turn on internet in apartments and things like that. But he said it'd be Wednesday. So I moved in Tuesday. I dealt without internet. I used my phone as a hotspot for a couple things. But then Wednesday came, and they said it was between 8 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. that they would be coming to turn it on. So I checked a few times during the day, no internet. Checked it at about 7 p.m., no internet, and I called them, and, oh, yeah, we're coming. They're going to be there. The guy will call you to let you know when it's turned on. I'll tell him to call you. He'll be there within a half an hour, and he will call you. None of that happened. The guy never called me. Nothing got connected. And so the next morning I called Cox again and to tell him that it's not working. And so the lady on the phone, she puts me on hold for a second, comes back on and goes, okay, it's on now. So after all of that, they did it remotely, which is like, I don't know why they make this big production out of all that, out of setting up cable when they can just do it remotely. So it's just a big hassle. But I'm hoping that this will work out, and it's not too expensive. It's like $34 a month. So not horrendous, but I've lived, most of the places I've lived lately, I've just had cable and things like that included. The last place that I had to pay utilities, but other than that, like usually cable is part of the deal. And this place, I think they're kind of cheaping out maybe on some of the little things, but the big things are all in place. So it's all good. So yeah, so the curation thing is happening. I'm working on a business that I mentioned last week. I'm going to be starting that at some point soon as I'm settled in here and can kind of get my bearings, which I think will happen in the next few days. I want to start that project of getting that product out that is going to help people get from $0 to $100 a month, or $0 to off the ground. Most people don't. They think about starting a business. That's all they do is they think about it, and they never do anything. So I just want to make it super easy to do, super easy to get something online and making that first dollar and then making $100 in a month. And I think that's where it's all about momentum. And that's what I found in life, and that's what I found in business, is that you start building up some momentum, and then things will start happening. And then if you continue that momentum, they just keep growing, and then you've got a business on your hands. So a passive income business. So that's coming up, but I wanted to get into the podcast today that I wanted to cover. So the first one is Nomad Capitalist, and I'm going to play this clip. He's going to talk about the idea of individualism and why we are responsible for ourselves.
We don't believe in standing up to change the country. We don't believe in taking back America or standing up for Britain or whatever country we live in. We believe that, first and foremost, taking care of ourselves, and if we have families, taking care of our families is our most important priority. Here at Nomad Capitalist, we believe in the power of the individual. Individualism over collectivism, the idea that it's not our responsibility to save the rest of people in the world who don't want to be saved. If U.S. persons want to go out and run up a bigger and bigger national debt, engage in deficit spending, fight wars all around the world, send money to every corrupt government to buy them off, dole out welfare payments, Social Security payments, free health care to over 100 million people. If that's what U.S. persons, or British or Australians or whatever, if that's what they want to do in their country, far be it from us to stop them, because we won't. It's just not the pragmatic approach. The Western world, in many respects, is already gone. in that people don't understand how it is that their country got so wealthy. Therefore, they don't know how to keep it from no longer being wealthy. I mean, think about that for a minute. If you live in the Western world, chances are most people that are your friends, your neighbors, people at your office, they have no idea why it is that they were born and they are living in a country that's so affluent. What is it that made their country affluent? And if you were to ask them, I highly doubt that many of them would say free trade, few regulations, low taxes or no taxes, government staying out of the way. Most people would not say that because they don't even know how they got rich in the first place. They just know that, oh, we're rich and over there they're poor. They have no idea why. They don't bother to think about it. So how do you expect those people to make the right decisions to continue to stay rich? Because history has shown that they don't. They're making all of the wrong decisions. They're doing the exact opposite of what made their country rich because they believe that they're infallible. You won't stop them because the tide has already turned in many of these countries, certainly in the United States and much of Europe. The tide has already turned. The people have spoken. They want their goodies, and they believe that there will be no rock bottom. They believe that people like you are tinfoil hat-wearing freaks for thinking that deficits, debts, profligate spending, endless wars, and everything else have consequences. You're responsible for you. You have to make the right decisions for you. It's not your obligation to stay there and earn money in your home country to pay it to a government, to prop up the government. I don't care how much American flag waving you want to do. You have zero obligation to stay in the United States and work and pay taxes to support the empire. If it's in your best interest, from a financial perspective, a freedom perspective, a personal perspective, a social perspective, whatever the case may be, if it's in your best interest to leave, you leave. Let the thugs in government and all the rest of the people who voted them into power, let them figure it out for themselves. That's their problem. You are not accountable to them. You're accountable only to you.
And that echoes a lot of what I've been saying on this show about freedom and where your responsibilities lie. And obviously, you own yourself, so your responsibilities lie first and foremost to yourself and what you can do to make your life better and more free and more prosperous. And then as you do that and make yourself happier and richer, that will spread out there to other people. So that is the way to go. You will not succeed in changing the country. You will not succeed in voting the right people in, or the quote right people in. And the best bet is to bet on yourself. So that actually leads right into the next segment that I had, the next podcast, and that's from the Tropical MBA guys. And I've had Dan Andrews on the show here, a past episode, so you can look that one up on freedom11.com. But they talk a lot about lifestyle business and basically location independence and entrepreneurship. So the last one, their latest podcast, was on how to make your first $1,000 online. And there was a part where Dan was talking, and I thought it was a really point that he was making. So I'm going to play that here, and then I'll comment on it right after.
You know, one of the things that was really impressive to me when I returned to the United States just a few weeks ago was if you don't have like a strong idea of what you ought to be concerned in or what you're focused on in your life, there are tons of people out there willing to give you the version of the world that they think you should care about. And I think specifically I'm talking about, not only friends and family and relatives and stuff, but I'm talking about media and the kind of obsession that American media in particular, and this is a worldwide thing, they have on a certain kind of line about like what you should care about. Like you should care about this album that came out. You should care about this war in this place. You should care about like these few hundred people who got sick with this disease. And like if you don't have a clear idea of what you're doing with your life, that's going to be the alternative. That's what's there, and it's there every day, and it's pretty overwhelming. And I think one of the reasons that inspired me so much to start this podcast and why podcasts were so huge to me is they represent this alternative media source. And they say, you know what? Like there are tons of other things in life that are important, and one of them is like your economic and financial future. Like one of them is like your desire to explore that world firsthand, and like not by some journalist who's out there like telling you what you should care about, but why don't you go there and figure out what you care about? There are people on independent media that are doing those things, making those journeys, and you can seek them out and follow them rather than sort of taking it at face value, what everybody feels like ought to be of value in your life. And who are these people anyway? When you start to meet these journalists, it's like the glass castle starts to fall down pretty quick. It's like, certainly your best interests aren't what's in their mind, right? I mean, they're thinking about maybe getting attention for their website and getting the most click-throughs, or impressing their donors, or impressing their boss. They're not thinking about you, potential entrepreneur in California, what you want to do with your life. And so I think it's really important the kinds of influences that you surround yourself with.
Again, that was Dan at tropicalmba.com. And yeah, I thought that was a really great point, that when you're here in the US and probably in a lot of other Western countries, but you're surrounded by this media that is bringing you in all different directions, and everything is important, and you can follow. There's like a story, it seems like about every other day there's a huge story that you should be paying attention to, and it goes around Facebook, it goes around, all the social media sites, and then everyone's talking about it. And sometimes I get caught up in that stuff and I start to follow it. It depends on what it is, but it usually is kind of a waste of time, and especially if it involves politics, that's when you really are wasting your time. So it's important to look at what you're following, what you're reading on a regular basis. And these days, it's so much easier to get away from that stuff. Most people I hang out with in like anywhere that I go, pretty much, San Diego, Austin, when I'm over in Asia, whatever, they don't have TVs, or they have one and don't use it. Like right now I have a TV, but I have no intention of turning it on. I think I will use it for movies at some point, but just to watch TV is, it really exposes you to a lot of stuff that just drag you in all sorts of directions that are kind of like leading you to a life of feeling helpless, because there is nothing you can do. And you see this stuff that's going on 2,000, 3,000 miles away or whatever, and it's supposed to horrify you, and then you're supposed to want to get angry and do something, and where does that bring you? What does that get you? So I really look at surrounding yourself by positive people, and also by positive media, or media that's going to help you in one way or another. And of course, you're going to be interested in occasional celebrity gossip and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that, but just going down the path of like, you turn on the news, like the general news on TV, and there's just things popping out all the time. There's emergencies, updates, alerts, and you have to know about these things, and then you're just sitting there on your couch and going, oh man, the world's going to hell, and I'm stuck, I'm frustrated, and I'm mad, I'm angry. What I just saw on TV made me angry, and that's going to, it's going to really set you back and hold you back from your ultimate potential. And then also the other thing that Dan kind of alluded to there was the idea that, the people on TV will tell you how it is. Like you'll hear how it is in Iran, or you'll hear how Indonesia is or something. And you could easily watch all this stuff and get the idea that the world is just a super dangerous place, and really you should just stay home. And but then you go out and you see these places for yourself, and it's a whole different world. It's a really whole different world, and you start meeting people in different countries and exposing yourself to a lot of places that you probably would be scared to go to if you just watch TV. So really, it's just about, kind of turning off the TV and getting out there and experiencing life and experiencing the world. And that's the thing. And Facebook sometimes can be pretty bad too, because you're kind of just seeing your friends' updates, and you're getting, the only information you get is from people that you know or people that are in your network. And, that can be kind of limiting too, but at least you get exposed to a variety. Even if it's just your friends, you're going to get probably a little bit more variety than you would by some TV show or news station that is just going to give you, their version, which of course is influenced by all kinds of things like government and corporations and all that. So you're not getting the actual real truth anyway. So that's, I thought that was a really important one. And lastly, I want to play a clip from my friend Wes Bertrand's podcast, Complete Liberty, and he has been talking about self-esteem for a long time, and I had him on the show. We talked about breaking free. That was the second episode of Freedom Lovin', so if you want to go back and check that one out, that was a really, really great episode. I got a lot of positive feedback on that, and he's ending his show soon. This is the second to last episode of Complete Liberty, which is a bummer to me because I get a lot out of it. I like listening to his show, and especially the last, year or so, it's gotten really good with talking about self-esteem and nonviolent communication, which are, I think, two things that people can bring into their lives and change for the positive without changing the world. So here's the clip from Wes, and I'll be back on the other side.
Following from this insight that Brandon mentions, there was a stem that he gave to a client. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is, her endings included, No one would feel sorry for me. Laughing. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is I'd move into unfamiliar territory. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is I'd have to take a fresh look at my boyfriend. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is I'd know nothing is holding me back but me. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is I might be alone. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is I'd have to learn a new way of living. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is suppose people put expectations on me. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is I'd have to learn to assert myself. The frightening thing about admitting my strengths is it doesn't feel frightening right now. I like this too. One of the secrets of Virginia Satir's great gifts, who actually was a professor at the grad school I went to. I didn't get a chance to meet her though, but NVC trainer Kelly Bryson did. And in an article he referred to her. I'll put that link in the show notes. I think it's a really important discussion about people pleasing. But anyway, he says one of the secrets of Virginia Satir's great gifts as a family therapist was her conviction that people possessed all the resources they needed to solve their problems, and her ability to transmit that conviction to the people with whom she worked. In terms of producing results, it is one of the most important abilities a psychotherapist can possess. Yeah, if we don't have a positive view of our capability and the inner resources, then, that becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? I can't do it. It's impossible. The status quo is preferable to any kind of change. It's overwhelming. I'm too anxious. All these kinds of things can set us up for failure. And he noted, when we are young, we may disown and repress feelings and emotions that evoke the disapproval of significant others and shake our own equilibrium. And we pay a price in later years in self-alienation, distorted perceptions, and any number of possible symptoms. Yet seen from the perspective of the child, the repression has functional utility. It has survival value. Its intention is to make the child able to live more successfully, or at least to minimize pain. Or again, when we are young, we may experience a good deal of hurt and rejection and develop a policy in, quote, self-protection, to reject others first. This policy does not make for a happy life, and yet its intention is not to cause suffering, but to reduce it. Survival strategies that do not serve our interests, but in fact hurt us, but to which we nonetheless cling like life preservers in a stormy sea, are the ones psychologists label, quote, neurotic. The ones that serve our interests we properly label, quote, good adaptations, such as learning to walk, speak, think, and earn a living. Clients can be deeply ashamed of some of their dysfunctional responses to life's challenges. They do not look at their behavior from the perspective of its intended functional utility. They are aware of their timidity, or over-aggressiveness, or avoidance of human intimacy, or compulsive sexuality, but not of its roots. They are not in contact with the needs they are blindly trying to address. Their shame and guilt do not make it easier for them to improve their condition, but harder. So one of the ways we can support self-esteem is by educating clients in the idea of survival strategies, helping them see that their worst mistakes can be understood as misguided attempts at self-preservation. Feelings of self-condemnation need to be examined and understood, but after this has been accomplished, their continued existence serves no useful purpose. When they are diminished, the client is freer to consider solutions that can better fill their needs. Quote, if it's your own perception that what you do does not work, are you willing to look at alternatives you might find more satisfying? Are you willing to experiment with trying something else? Unquote. Indeed, seeing this process as experiments in better living, in enriching one's life to the max.
Yeah, and that's really what life comes down to, is it's just a series of experiments, right? So you are thinking about doing something and then you do it, and that's where the fun happens, because yeah, there's going to be a lot of challenges along the way, there's going to be a lot of failures, but the kind of breaking free, again, going back to what we talked about on our podcast on episode number 2, breaking free from what is holding you back, these things that these patterns that you're just following, that one can just follow without thinking, without questioning, is so easy to do. And I listened to a show that I'm not going to play any of it here, but I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast. If you haven't heard Joe Rogan's show, it's great. Each of the podcasts are about 3 hours long, and it's just a conversation with him and usually some interesting person. I don't typically download all of them, but the one he had Sam Harris on, author and famous atheist Sam Harris, on the show. And Sam Harris believes in the idea of determinism, and he believes that free will does not exist. And that's where I kind of part ways with Harris, and I see it as that I think maybe the majority of people, probably the majority of people, just kind of follow along with whatever patterns they get stuck into when they're like 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, and they don't really ever break out of them, and they just kind of follow along, and then their lives are just lived by what they see other people wanting for them, and then they don't ever break into something that they want to do, that they're desiring to do, and it's just sort of a robotic life. And so I think that is the majority of people, but there are people that exercise their free will, and they have those memes in their head, they have those kind of tapes playing in their head, but they overcome them. Now, I don't know why that is. I don't know why some people do overcome their programming and some people don't, but it happens. I mean, you have people that come from a background where not one person in their life was doing anything productive. They come from alcoholics and drug addicts and people that just deal drugs for a living, and just that, and that's all they know, and then they somehow break out of it and make a really great successful life. So there are examples of people that obviously use their free will to do things that were not in their programming. So anyway, that's about all I had for that. I will link to all three of these shows, these websites and these podcasts that I just discussed. So if you like this format, let me know, because I enjoy doing it and I'd like to keep bringing it. But if I don't hear anything back, I assume that people are not so much into it. So just if you could just put a comment on this post at just freedomlovin.com, or any post, and you just put in a comment there or send me an email, that would be awesome. It's Kevin at freedomlovin.com. And just one more thing to mention before I sign off here is another podcast I've been listening to, and it's called The Ty Lopez Show, Grand Theory of Everything. And he basically just reads a book every day, and then he talks about what he gets, like some of the things that he got out of the book, and then he talks about just some things that, some advice that he's given. He's been pretty successful in his career, and he is able to shed a lot of really good information on his show. So I'll link to that as well. But the thing that I want to give today is a freedom tip. So I think every week now, or every time I do a podcast, I'll give a tip that I've been able to implement in my life, not just learn, but implement, and what that's kind of done. And one thing he mentioned, and I think it was on the last show that I listened to of his, was this idea of doing things responding to things as they happen. So, for example, email. Email is a really good example. I really dislike doing a lot of email. I don't like sitting in my email box and just responding to emails. I kind of dread it some days. And so what happens is I will go through my emails in the morning and I will skip a lot of them. I'll just skip them over and I'll go, no, I'll do that later. And then it makes it worse. It's just a form of procrastination where I'm going, instead of doing it now, I put it off, and then it becomes bigger and bigger, and then it becomes more of a pain and becomes something I dread even more later, and so I don't do it. Or I forget about the email, or something like that. So instead of that, what's worked way better, and this is what he was mentioning, is this idea of just doing it immediately, just doing everything. Like, you get a request and you just respond immediately. Somebody sends you an email and they need something and you get it and you read it, that's when you respond to it, not the next day. So, because it's really easy to get into that habit of putting things off and not doing them. And what happens is, when you get in that mode of just responding immediately, and not to say that you have like doing this on every single email that you get, like sitting there waiting for emails to come in and then responding right away. But if you are in the part of your day where you're checking email, then just respond to everything and don't put it off. Don't put it into some folder or something. Just respond to it if it needs responding to. So, and what that does is it kind of gets you in a mindset of not just an email, but everything else in life. Like, for example, like I'm moving in and I see there's papers on the ground or something. I'm walking by, I'm thinking, oh, I'm in a hurry, I need to do this and this and this, I can't go pick up those papers. But actually picking up those papers and putting them away is it decreases stress levels, and it feels much better than just kind of like waiting for the exact right time to do whatever it is. So that's one thing that I feel like is something that I learned this week and I've been applying, and it's been good. So I want to keep that rolling, and it's also a momentum thing where I'm just going to keep doing that, and it kind of applies to all areas of life. And I think that's a time saver, and it's a stress reliever. So anyway, that's that. I'll have a link to that as well in this show, and I hope you're doing really well out there, and go out there and build some freedom, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Freedom Lovin' Podcast. To break free today, head on over to freedomlovin.com and download our free guide. 7 practical tips to living free in an unfree world.